He kept checking his phone, hoping for a message that would never come. Each minute stretched like an hour, and in that silence, a truth was screaming louder than any rejection. She had already moved on, while he was still kneeling before a ghost. He kept checking his screen, hoping for some sign that would never come. Each minute stretched like an hour, and in that silence, a truth was screaming louder than any rejection. Her silence was deliberate, while he was still kneeling before a ghost. He kept checking his inbox, hoping for a reply that would never come. Each minute stretched like an hour, and in that silence a truth was screaming louder than any rejection. Her silence was deliberate, while he was still kneeling before a ghost. He kept checking his messages, hoping for some sign that would never come. Each minute stretched like an hour, and in that silence, a truth was screaming louder than any rejection. She was laughing in someone else's arms, while he was still kneeling before a ghost. He kept checking his phone, hoping for a reply that would never come. Each minute stretched like an hour, and in that silence, a truth was screaming louder than any rejection. His name was erased from her world, while he was still kneeling before a ghost. He gave everything, his time, his energy, his emotional clarity, and now all he had left was the echo of his own expectations. That's the cruel irony. When you give more than you receive, you start creating an illusion so powerful that you believe it's mutual. But love that needs to be begged for is no longer love. It's a transaction where one side pays with hope and the other never even looks at the receipt. The silence isn't accidental, it's strategic. Her silence controls the rhythm of his emotions. One unread message is enough to paralyze his day. One ignored call can make him question his worth. She doesn't need to say anything anymore. Her absence speaks volumes, and he listens to every second of that absence, like a dog waiting at the door, mistaking neglect for mystery. She knows he's still there. That's why she never fully cuts the cord. There's always a small window left open, just enough to keep him wondering, never enough to let him in. It's not love, it's leverage. And the more he insists, the stronger she becomes. Because in the twisted economy of emotional power, attention is currency, and he's bankrupting himself. He plays old memories like reruns of a show that ended long ago. Every laugh they shared becomes a script for his own heartbreak. Every message he rereads is a prayer for something that's already died. But she's not reading the same lines. She's already flipped the script. He's a supporting actor in a drama that only he is still watching. And the worst part, he keeps buying tickets for the next season, knowing the plot won't change. This is not devotion. This is delusion. And delusion dressed as loyalty will keep a man enslaved long after the woman has moved on. He keeps showing up for a war that ended in surrender, not hers, his. The battlefield is empty, but he's still bleeding, still holding flowers in a world where she's already handed them to someone else. A man who insists when he's already been dismissed isn't being romantic. He's being self-destructive. Persistence is only noble when there's still something worth fighting for. When that flame has turned to cold ash, every message sent is a confession of emotional dependence. Every good morning text is a whisper that says, "I don't know who I am without you." And that's not love, that's identity loss. She doesn't hate him, she just doesn't think about him, and that's worse. Indifference is more brutal than rejection because rejection at least acknowledges your presence. Indifference denies your existence, and the more he tries to prove he's worth remembering, the more invisible he becomes. Because in her world, people who don't move on become background noise, and nobody rewinds a song just to hear silence again. He still believes that one more message, one more gesture, one more declaration of love will change everything. That if he just proves how good his intentions are, how much he cares, she'll finally look back. But here's the hard truth. Intentions don't matter in a game of power. In fact, the more emotionally naked he becomes, the easier it is for her to ignore him. Because in her eyes, emotional desperation doesn't look like love. It looks like weakness, and weakness is never seductive. She already filed him away in her mind, labeled, categorized, forgotten. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he made himself too available. And the cruel psychology behind attraction is this: what is always accessible is rarely respected. What is constantly explained loses its mystery, and mystery is oxygen to desire. The moment he tried to become her everything, he became invisible. That's what most men don't understand. Love isn't proven by how much you give, it's preserved by how much you protect yourself. When you hand over your emotional power without filters, without conditions, you become predictable. And the predictable man is never the man she obsesses over. He's the man she calls when the others disappear, the placeholder, the emotional servant, the one she thanks but never chooses. He might tell himself, "I just need closure." But closure isn't something she'll give. It's something he has to claim. Because the truth is, she's already closed the door. She just left it unlocked so he'd keep knocking, not to let him in, but to remind herself that someone still wants her. His suffering is her reassurance. His pain is her proof of value. And until he locks that door from his side, the cycle will repeat. He overanalyzes the last conversation, the tone of her voice, the punctuation in her texts. He reads between the lines of her silence as if there's a hidden code, but there's no code. The message is clear. She doesn't want to explain because she doesn't need to. When a woman is emotionally done, she speaks with her absence. And if he still needs words to understand that, then he's not listening. He's hoping. And hope can be the most dangerous drug. It makes men stay when they should walk. It paints red flags white. It turns rejection into fantasy. But here's what no one tells him. She's not coming back. Not because she hates him, but because she's already rewritten her story without him. And the longer he waits, the more he becomes a footnote in a chapter that ended silently months ago. She doesn't need to block him. She knows he'll keep watching. She doesn't need to respond. She knows he'll keep sending. That's the cruelty of passive manipulation. It doesn't scream. It doesn't confront. It simply ignores. And in that ignoring, it robs him of his dignity, one unread message at a time. Until he's not even trying to win her back, he's just trying not to disappear. But disappearing is exactly what he needs to do. Not to punish her, but to recover himself. Because this isn't about her anymore. This is about the part of him that accepted emotional starvation and called it love. The part of him that confused loyalty with self-neglect. That part must die, or he will keep living the same heartbreak with different faces. He thinks she might regret it one day. That one day she'll realize what she lost. But that's another illusion. People only regret what challenged them, not what chased them. She won't miss him if he was always there. She'll only wonder if he becomes a question mark instead of a period. And that's what silence is supposed to be. Not desperation, but mystery. Not begging, but presence removed with power. It's not too late for him, but only if he stops explaining his worth and starts embodying it. Only if he stops waiting for her to return and starts walking toward his own standards. She won't respect the man who stayed on his knees. She'll remember the man who stood up and walked away without needing to be seen doing it. He finally stops texting, not because he's over it, but because he's exhausted. There's nothing left to say. He's said it all, explained his pain, justified his presence, pleaded for clarity, and in return, silence. Not the kind that invites reconciliation. The kind that confirms she moved on, and he's the only one still checking for signs of life in a house that burned down. But now something strange begins to happen. In that silence, not hers but his, power begins to return, not over her, but over himself. Because silence is not just absence, it's a form of communication. And when used with precision, it becomes a message louder than any paragraph ever sent. A message that says, "I don't need your approval to exist." That's where real healing starts, not in closure from her, but in discipline within. Discipline to not react to every emotional trigger, to not feed the urge to explain, to not fall into the trap of defending feelings that were never respected to begin with. Because when you argue for your value, you suggest it's up for negotiation, and your value is not a debate, it's a reality, either recognized or lost, but never discounted. He begins to see things more clearly. That the more he tried to prove himself, the more he was training her to take him for granted. That every act of emotional generosity without boundaries only taught her one thing: he'll always be there. And people don't chase what they believe they can't lose. They only chase what can disappear. There's a quiet shift inside him. No announcement, no Instagram quote, just a subtle but powerful shift. He no longer dreams of her coming back. He dreams of himself not caring, not out of bitterness, but out of balance. Because true emotional freedom isn't getting her back. It's no longer needing her to feel whole. That's the most dangerous man, the one who doesn't flinch at silence, who doesn't chase what walks away, who doesn't explain what he knows is true. He becomes unshakable. And in that unshakable silence, the entire dynamic changes. Maybe she notices, maybe she doesn't, but it no longer matters. Because the power has returned to where it always belonged, within him. And something unexpected happens when a man stops insisting. He starts attracting, not because he became colder, but because he became sovereign. Mystery returns, value increases, and suddenly the same silence that once broke him becomes his most magnetic weapon. Because nothing confuses someone used to power more than the one who no longer seeks their validation. He walks into a room differently now. Not louder, not more charming, just more still, more present, more certain. That's what strength looks like. Not in how you argue, but in what you refuse to argue for. That's what seduction feels like. Not in pursuit, but in presence. And yes, maybe one day she remembers. Maybe she scrolls back through the messages. Maybe she rereads the last thing he said. Not because she wants him again, but because the silence left an echo she didn't expect. And in that echo, she realizes something. He stopped dancing. He stopped waiting. And in doing so, he reclaimed everything she once used to control him. But he doesn't care anymore, because now he understands. The moment you stop fighting for the wrong thing is the moment you start becoming the right thing for yourself. He used to replay every conversation in his head, trying to find the exact moment things shifted. The word he said wrong, the message he sent too late, the vulnerability he revealed too soon. He believed if he could identify the turning point, maybe he could reverse it, fix it, go back. But now he realizes it was never about what he said. It was about what she already decided, but never had the courage to say. When someone benefits from your confusion, they will never clarify. That's the silent cruelty of emotional manipulation. It doesn't scream. It doesn't insult. It just lets you destroy yourself trying to understand why nothing is ever enough. Why every act of love feels like throwing coins into a bottomless well. Why your loyalty becomes a currency that keeps losing value. She never said you meant nothing. She just acted like it. And that's what made it worse, because if she had said it out loud, maybe you would have walked away. But she kept just enough warmth to make you stay, just enough attention to make you hope, just enough silence to make you blame yourself. And so you stayed, not because you didn't see the truth, but because a part of you refused to accept that someone could use love as leverage. But that's exactly what she did, not with cruelty, but with convenience. You were her emotional insurance, the safety net for nights when the world didn't clap loud enough, when attention ran dry, when the men she really wanted didn't stay. And yet you kept giving, not out of stupidity, out of belief. Belief that consistency would win her respect, that availability would earn her desire, that love, unconditional and unrelenting, would be enough. But love, without boundaries, isn't love. It's a discount, and people rarely value what comes without conditions. The hardest pill to swallow isn't that she didn't love you back. It's that she loved your devotion, not you. She loved the way you made her feel powerful, adored, irreplaceable. And once that feeling became familiar, you became disposable. Because in her mind, you would never leave. And in yours, leaving felt like failure. But staying was the slowest form of self-erasure. Then one day, you stop asking. You stop wondering. You stop watching her stories, her likes, her photos. Not because it doesn't sting, but because you finally accept the sting is better than the slow rot of waiting. And in that acceptance, something vital is reborn. Dignity. Dignity is not loud. It doesn't announce its comeback. It doesn't post quotes. It doesn't need revenge. Dignity just quietly replaces desperation. It puts the phone down. It walks away mid-thought. It stops writing paragraphs to someone who won't even read them. It becomes a quiet shield, not because you're heartless, but because you're done begging to be chosen. And that's the beginning of everything, because once you reclaim your dignity, you begin to move differently. You no longer chase attention, you command presence. You no longer tolerate half-love, you require depth. You no longer explain your worth, you embody it. And suddenly, she senses the shift. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. She notices the silence feels different now, not like absence, but like refusal. A refusal to be used, to be strung along, to be anyone's option. And that refusal, wrapped in silence, is louder than any confrontation. She may never admit she lost you. That's fine. You don't need the confession, because when a man chooses dignity over desperation, he doesn't need closure. He becomes it. She'll never say it out loud, but the silence that once empowered her starts to feel like a void. The space you used to fill with affirmations, good mornings, check-ins, reassurance, now it echoes. She scrolls through her phone expecting your name, not because she misses you, but because she misses the mirror you held up to her ego, the pedestal you built. And without that constant worship, she starts to question her worth. That's the irony of silent manipulation. It breeds dependency too, not the healthy kind, the parasitic kind. The manipulator needs a mirror, and when the mirror vanishes, so does the illusion of control. You were her reflection of power. Now, all she sees is the absence of the reaction she used to count on. But this isn't about her anymore, because the moment you stop responding to silence with desperation, you start to heal. And in that healing, you begin to build a version of yourself that doesn't flinch when love feels uncertain. You stop romanticizing people who only offer emotional breadcrumbs. You stop confusing access with intimacy. You stop pouring into someone who won't even lift a glass for you. And then comes the most brutal realization of all. The love you wanted from her, you needed to give to yourself. You weren't looking for a woman. You were looking for validation. For reassurance that your softness didn't make you weak, that your loyalty wasn't foolish, that your emotional depth wasn't too much. But the truth is, you were never too much. You were just with someone who was too little. That's the trap many men fall into, thinking if they just explain a little more, love a little harder, wait a little longer, they'll finally be seen. But those who only respond to silence with more silence aren't waiting for you to improve. They're waiting for you to break, because the more you break, the more control they gain, and the more control they gain, the less of you remains. But when you choose to detach, not in anger, but in clarity, you rob them of that power. You don't slam the door. You don't send a final text. You don't post about your growth. You just become unavailable. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, not as a tactic, but as a truth, because your peace is no longer up for negotiation. People often ask, how do I know if I was being used? The answer is simple. When your absence causes relief instead of regret, you were never valued. But when your silence starts to shift the atmosphere, when your lack of attention creates tension, that's when you realize your presence was never the problem. It was your accessibility. From now on, you don't beg to be seen. You don't audition for affection. You don't prove your worth to those who treat love like a transaction. You are the investment. And anyone who doesn't see that doesn't deserve the return. And maybe, just maybe, one day she'll reach out. Not because she suddenly loves you, but because the silence that once empowered her now scares her. Don't fall for it. Because when you rebuild yourself, it's not just your heart that changes, it's your standards. And no matter how familiar her voice sounds, you'll hear it with new ears. Not every silence deserves a response. Some deserve your absence forever. And if you've come this far, it's because you're finally ready to stop waiting for the apology that will never come. You're ready to stop hoping that clarity will arrive in the form of her honesty. Because here's the hard truth. You don't need closure from someone who never gave you commitment. You don't need answers from someone who couldn't even offer respect. You need distance. You need peace. You need to look at your past not as a graveyard of failed love, but as a battlefield where you finally reclaimed your self-worth. And the next time someone dares to offer silence as power, you won't chase them anymore. You'll walk the other way, carrying a version of yourself that no longer needs to beg. Because the man who chooses peace over validation is no longer afraid to be alone. He's just unwilling to be used.